September 14th, 2018. Yellowstone National Park welcomed the last tourists of Indian summer. Golden aspen leaves trembled in the wind. The air smelled of pine needles and sulfur from the hot springs. Mark Anderson parked his red Ford Explorer at the trailhead. 12-year-old Ethan jumped out of the car. The boy couldn't sit still with excitement. It was his first visit to Yellowstone. "Dad, is it true that geysers can shoot 100 meters into the air?" Ethan asked, rummaging through his backpack. Mark smiled for the first time in several days. Since his divorce, smiling had been difficult for him. But his son changed everything. These moments made life worth living. "Old Faithful reaches 55 meters, his father replied, checking the tent pegs. "But we'll see something more interesting." Ethan took out his new camera, a parting gift from his mother. Jennifer was worried about letting her son go to the mountains. But Mark promised to call every evening at 9 o'clock sharp. They registered at the ranger station at 3:30 p.m. The ranger on duty, Tom Harris, gave them a trail map. He warned them about bear activity in the Hayden Valley area. "Typical family," Harris wrote in his log. "Father is an experienced hiker. Son is a first-timer. Mood is excellent." This entry would be the last documented record of their lives. Mark planned to show his son the remote hot springs, places where tourists with selfie sticks didn't crowd around. There, you could feel the primal power of the earth. "Where are we going, Dad?" Ethan walked alongside, studying the map. "To Norris Geyser Basin. There are springs there that remember the mammoths. Trail number 7 led away from the main routes. A special silence reigned here. Only the rustling of pine trees and the gurgling of invisible springs underground could be heard." At 6:45 p.m., they met a tourist from California named Robert Chen. He was photographing the sunset over the rocks. Ethan was showing his father something in the guidebook. They looked happy. "How far is it to the lookout point?" Mark asked. "About a 20-minute walk," Chen replied, unaware that he was giving a statement for a future investigation. Father and son continued along the trail. Chen watched them go. Just a normal family out for a walk. Nothing unusual. But an hour later, a scream rang out in the valley. Ranger Sarah Wilson, who was patrolling the far end of the park, heard a sound that still haunts her to this day. It was a human voice, distorted by panic and pain. Wilson rushed toward the sound. Her flashlight picked out tree trunks and wisps of steam in the darkness. Her heart was pounding. In the park, every scream could mean an encounter with a predator. But when she reached the thermal field, she found no one. Only white steam and an ominous silence. The ground beneath her feet was hot. Boiling water seeped through in places. Wilson searched the area. She shone her flashlight into every crevice and thicket. There were no signs of people or animals. Maybe she had imagined it. Sounds can be deceiving in the mountains. She returned to base and reported the incident. Park Superintendent James Morrison noted the report, a routine entry in the duty log. No one knew that this scream would be the last the world would hear from Mark and Ethan Anderson. September 15th, 7 in the morning. Jennifer's phone was ringing off the hook. Mark wasn't answering. He had promised to call at 9 last night. Being half an hour late was normal. But at 10? Jennifer dialed the park administration number. With a trembling voice, she explained the situation. The dispatcher responded reassuringly that he would send a ranger to their campsite. Tom Harris arrived at the site at 11:30. The Andersons' tent was untouched. The sleeping bags were neatly laid out. The canned food and camping stove were still there. But the campers themselves were nowhere to be found. Their car was parked at the start of trail number 7, The keys were in the front seat. Mark's wallet with his credit cards and cash was in the glove compartment. "People don't just disappear," Harris muttered, looking around the empty tent. But in Yellowstone, people did disappear. Every year, the park swallowed tourists without a trace. Bears, wolves, cliffs, hot springs. Death took many forms here. At 2:20 p.m., Park Superintendent Morrison issued a search warrant, standard procedure for missing visitors. He had no idea that one of the most high-profile cases in national park history was about to begin. The search and rescue operation unfolded with military precision. 120 rangers, 35 volunteers, 8 canine teams. 3 helicopters combed the area from the air. Captain David Stone was in charge of the operation. He was a veteran with 22 years of experience. During his career, he had found lost tourists, climbers, and mushroom pickers. But this case seemed strange to him from the very beginning. "An experienced tourist doesn't disappear without a trace," he explained to reporters, "especially with a child." On September 16th, searchers found the first traces. Mark's boot prints and Ethan's sneakers were imprinted on trail number 7. Clear tracks led to the Solfatara Flats thermal field. This is a little visited area with active hot springs. The water temperature reaches 100 degrees Celsius. The acidity is like battery fluid. One wrong move and a person would be boiled alive. The trail ended at the edge of the thermal field. There was no trail beyond that. Only hot ground and poisonous fumes. "Maybe they got lost in the dark," suggested one of the rangers. "Or they encountered a bear," added another. But Stone shook his head. Something didn't add up in that version. On September 17th, the K9 team found Ethan's backpack. It was lying in the bushes 50 meters from where the trail ended. Inside, they found the boy's camera. The last photos were taken on September 14th at 7:23 p.m. The photos show thermal springs, swirling steam, and Ethan smiling next to his father in front of a geyser. One photo made the rescuers suspicious. In the background, a figure in a ranger uniform was visible. The silhouette stood to the side, as if watching the family. "Who is that?" Stone asked his colleagues. No one recognized the man in the photo. On September 18th, the dogs picked up a fresh trail. It led from a backpack to a large thermal field. But at the very edge of the hot zone, the animals stopped. They refused to go any further. "The dogs sense danger," explained dog handler Mike Bronson. "The hot ground will burn their paws." Rescuers attempted to survey the thermal field in protective suits, but the thick equipment hindered their movement. Visibility through the respirators was limited. After 3 hours of searching, they found no trace of human presence, only bubbling springs and the acrid smell of sulfur. By the evening of September 18th, it was clear that the Andersons would not be found alive. The operation turned into a search for bodies. On September 19th, a thermal spring expert, Professor John Rice from the University of Montana, joined the search. He explained the treacherous properties of the geothermal zone to the rescuers. "If a person falls into a boiling spring, the body will dissolve in a matter of hours," Rice said. "The high temperature and acidity will leave no trace." These words sounded like a death sentence. Mark and Ethan Anderson had most likely died in the hot springs. Their bodies had been completely consumed by nature. On September 20th, the official search was called off. Only volunteers and relatives of the victims remained. Jennifer Anderson flew to Yellowstone as soon as she heard the news. She was pale from sleepless nights, her eyes red from crying. But she was determined to find her son. "I won't believe they're dead until I see proof," she told reporters. Every day she joined search parties. She walked every trail, looked into every crevice. She posted flyers with photos of the missing. Local residents sympathized with the grief-stricken mother. But with each passing day, hope faded. Yellowstone rarely returns its victims. On September 21, the first false alarm came in. Tourists from Germany claimed to have seen a man with a child at Yellowstone Lake, 40 kilometers from the place of disappearance. The man looked confused, said witness Ingrid Miller. The boy was crying. They quickly disappeared into the forest. Rescuers searched the entire shoreline of the lake. They combed the surrounding woods. The result was zero. On September 25th, local resident Frank Coleman reported smoke coming from a campfire in an abandoned forester's cabin. The team set out for the location with hope in their hearts. The smoke turned out to be steam from a natural hot spring. On September 29th, an anonymous call came into the hotline. A female voice claimed that the Andersons were being held captive by a crazy hermit in the mountains. The FBI traced the call to its source. It was a prank by teenagers from a neighboring state. By the end of September, it was clear that the Andersons were not alive. The case gradually became classified as unsolved. But Detective Lisa Brooks of the Denver Police Department did not give up. She delved deeper into the family history of Mark Anderson. What she discovered forced her to reconsider the accident theory. Mark was undergoing therapy for depression after his divorce. There were episodes when he missed appointments with his son. His psychotherapist noted suicidal thoughts. What if it wasn't an accident? Brooks asked at a meeting of the investigation team. What if Mark decided to kill himself and take his son with him? The murder-suicide theory explained many oddities. Why they veered off the main route. Why they ended up in a dangerous thermal zone after dark. But Jennifer Anderson categorically rejected this theory. Mark loved Ethan more than life itself, she repeated. He would never hurt him. However, the facts told a different story. Searches for Yellowstone hot springs were found on Mark's laptop. They included information about the temperature at which death occurs. These searches were dated August 2018, a month before the trip. November brought new suspicions. A check of park employees revealed that one of the rangers had been fired for inappropriate behavior in 2017. Ray Thompson, 41 years old. After his dismissal, he got by doing odd jobs. He took tourists fishing and worked as a guide in remote areas of the park. Thompson had a drinking problem, said a former colleague. He could disappear for days. He would show up with wild stories. On July 20th of the following year, Thompson was detained for questioning. He claimed that on the night of his disappearance, he had been drinking at the Mustang Bar in West Yellowstone. The bar's owner, Bill McCarthy, confirmed his alibi. Security cameras recorded Thompson's presence from 8 p.m. to 2 a.m. He was released, but suspicions remained. It was too convenient an alibi for a man with a troubled reputation. By the end of 2019, the Anderson case was virtually closed. It was classified as a cold case. Every 6 months, Detective Robert Hardy reviewed the case files, looking for clues that had been overlooked. But all traces of Mark and Ethan Anderson seemed to have vanished into thin air. It was as if they had stepped into a parallel world. Jennifer created the Find Ethan Foundation. She helped families of other missing children. But every night she fell asleep thinking about her son. Where is he? Is he alive? Is he suffering? She had no idea that the answer to these questions lay hidden deep beneath the earth. In the hot depths of Yellowstone, where the temperature melts rocks. And one day, this secret would come to the surface. Literally, who could have done this? The answer will shock you. Part 2. Revelation, September 12th, 2023. 5 years later. Ranger Sarah Wilson was patrolling the Emerald Pool thermal area. Morning fog rose from the hot springs. The tourist season was coming to an end. The park was preparing for winter. Wilson noticed strange activity at a small geyser. The Whispering Spring usually erupted once every 6 hours. Today, it had been active continuously for 3 hours straight. She moved closer to check the water temperature. The thermometer read 94 degrees, normal for this spring. But something white flashed in the bubbling water. Her first thought was trash. Tourists sometimes threw coins into the springs for luck, despite strict prohibitions by the park administration. Wilson looked closer. The white object floated up and sank into the boiling water. It wasn't a coin. It was a bone, a human bone. The ranger's heart skipped a beat. She immediately contacted her superiors by radio. Half an hour later, the spring was cordoned off with yellow tape. By evening, a team of experts had arrived. Forensic scientist Dr. Emily Chen from the University of Montana led the recovery operation. The work is extremely difficult, Chen explained to reporters. The high temperature and acidity of the water. We had to use robotics. A special mechanical arm retrieved several bone fragments from the spring, a piece of charred fabric, and a metal object that made everyone freeze. A children's watch engraved with the words, "To Ethan from Dad. With love." 2018. Jennifer Anderson received a call at the Find Ethan Foundation office. The voice of the detective, who introduced himself as Hardy, was trembling with excitement. "Mrs. Anderson, we need to meet. We've found a discovery that may be related to your son." Jennifer's world collapsed for the second time in 5 years. On September 15th, DNA testing confirmed the terrible suspicion. The bones belonged to Ethan Anderson, age at the time of death, 12 years old. Cause of death, exposure to extremely high temperatures. But only one set of remains was found at the source. Where was Mark Anderson? Experts thoroughly searched the area around the Whispering Spring. Geologist Professor John Rice explained why the remains had surfaced now. Recent underground shifts changed the hydraulics of the spring, Rice said. It began to eject material that had been lying at the bottom for years. On September 16th, a metal detector found a knife with a 15-centimeter blade. It was lying under a layer of fallen leaves 50 meters from the spring. There was dried blood on the handle. DNA analysis of the blood yielded results that turned the case upside down. The blood belonged to Mark Anderson. This is no longer an accident, Park County Sheriff Michael O'Connor said at a press conference. We are dealing with a homicide. Within 200 meters of where the knife was found, fragments of an adult male's clothing were discovered. Pieces of a shirt and jeans showed clear signs of a struggle. Forensic scientist Jennifer Blake reconstructed a rough picture of what happened. Analysis of the bloodstains showed the trajectory of the wounded Mark's movements. The victim suffered a stab wound but remained mobile, Blake explained. The blood trail leads from the scene of the altercation to a cliff above the ravine. The search team descended into the 200-meter deep ravine. The rocky bottom was overgrown with bushes. It was the perfect place to hide a body. But after 3 days of searching, they found nothing. The DNA from the knife handle did not match any records in the CODIS database. The killer had no previous criminal record. Detective Hardy began checking everyone who had access to remote areas of the park in September 2018. The list included 127 people. Rangers, guides, researchers, contractors, technicians, everyone had to be checked. Everyone needed an alibi for the evening of September 14th. The process dragged on. Many witnesses had moved away in the 5 years since the crime. Some had died. people's memories of events from 5 years ago proved unreliable. On September 25th, FBI agent Michael Connor joined the investigation. He was a serial homicide specialist with 20 years of experience. "The criminal is familiar with the park," Connor said at a meeting of the investigation team. "He knew how to hide evidence. He knew about the properties of thermal springs." Connor compiled a psychological profile of the killer. Male, aged 25 to 45. Works or has worked in the park, has a vehicle, prone to control and domination, possibly has hunting experience. The profile narrowed the list of suspects to 30 people. But that wasn't enough to press charges. On September 30th, there was a breakthrough. A witness who had been silent for 5 years finally decided to speak up. David Walker, a tourist from Texas, called the police after seeing news reports about the discovery. What he said changed the course of the investigation. "I saw them that evening," Walker told Detective Hardy. "A father and son. But there was another man with them." According to Walker, the third man was dressed in a ranger uniform. He was tall, blond, and had a scar on his left cheek. "They weren't on the main trail," the witness clarified. "They were on a service road that tourists don't usually use." Walker explained why he had remained silent for 5 years. That evening, he himself had broken park rules by lighting a fire in a restricted area. He was afraid of being fined. The description of the third man matched that of one of the park employees. Kevin Rogers, 36 years old, a thermal equipment maintenance technician. Rogers had been working in Yellowstone since 2016. He had access to all areas of the park, including those closed to tourists. He knew the ranger's duty roster. Colleagues described him as a withdrawn and strange person. He avoided socializing and preferred to work alone. He lived in a trailer on park grounds. "Kevin was always a weirdo," said his partner Brian Cole. "He could disappear for half a day without explanation. He said he was studying wild animal behavior." On October 5th, detectives obtained a search warrant for Rogers' home. In the trailer, they found a collection of photographs of tourists taken with a hidden camera. Hundreds of pictures of families, children, and lone travelers. Rogers had been secretly photographing park visitors for several years. Among the photos were pictures of Mark and Ethan Anderson, dated September 14, 2018. They were taken a few hours before their disappearance. In a desk drawer, there was a diary with detailed notes about his observations. Rogers described the habits and routes of various tourists. An entry from September 14, 2018, sent shivers down the detectives' spines. "Father and son, the perfect pair. Today I will find out how strong they are." On October 8th, DNA analysis confirmed that the saliva on a cigarette butt found near the crime scene belonged to Kevin Rogers. Technical evidence, witness testimony, psychological profiling, everything pointed to one person: Kevin Rogers. On October 10th, the arrest team received a warrant. Rogers was detained in the morning on his way to work. He did not resist. "You're wrong," he repeated in handcuffs. "I didn't do anything." But the evidence said otherwise. During his first interrogation, Rogers denied any involvement in the murder. He claimed that on September 14, 2018, he was working in the far part of the park. He was checking the condition of the geothermal equipment. "I have an alibi," insisted the suspect. "Check the maintenance logs." The detectives checked. The logs showed that Rogers had indeed left to check the equipment. But the time of his return was not recorded. On October 12th, Rogers' lawyer filed a motion for bail. Prosecutor Michael Stewart objected. "The defendant is a danger to society," Stewart told the court. We have reason to believe that he may flee or harm witnesses. The judge denied the bail request. Rogers remained in custody. On October 15th, during his second interrogation, Rogers began to break down. Detective Hardy showed him photos of the Andersons from his collection. "Explain how these photos came into your possession," Hardy demanded. "I take pictures of all tourists," Rogers replied. "It's my hobby. I study people's behavior in nature." "And why do you have a knife with the victim's blood on it?" A long pause. Rogers stared at the table, avoiding the detective's gaze. "It's not what you think," he finally said. "Then what is it?" Another pause. Rogers knew he was cornered. The evidence was irrefutable. On October 18th, Rogers partially confessed to the crime, but he claimed he had not planned to kill the Andersons. "It was an accident," he said during his third interrogation. "I didn't want to kill them." Prosecutor Stewart did not believe this version. Too much evidence pointed to premeditation. On October 20th, investigators charged Rogers with first-degree murder, double murder with aggravating circumstances. If convicted, the defendant faced life imprisonment. If he refused to cooperate with the authorities, he could face the death penalty. Rogers' lawyer asked for time to consider the case. On October 22nd, Kevin Rogers gave a full account of the events of September 14th, 2018. He described how he met the Andersons on the trail, how he lured them into a trap. But investigators were waiting for an answer to the main question, the very question that had tormented the victims' relatives for 5 years. Why? What turned an ordinary technician into a cold-blooded killer? What dark force drove him to commit such a monstrous crime? The answer Rogers gives shocks even experienced detectives. The truth turns out to be worse than the darkest assumptions. Part 3. Justice, October 25th, 2023. An interrogation room in the Park County Sheriff's Office. Kevin Rogers sat across from Detective Hardy. His hands were folded on the table. His gaze was fixed on the floor. For 5 days, he had remained silent, responding only with, "I don't remember," and "I don't know." But today something had changed. The lawyer whispered a few words to his client. Rogers nodded and raised his head. "I'm ready to tell the truth," he said in a quiet voice. The detective turned on the tape recorder. Silence fell in the room. "I didn't plan to kill them," Rogers began. "At first, it was just a game." According to him, it all started with observing tourists. Rogers secretly followed park visitors, studying their habits and routes. "I liked feeling powerful," he explained. "I knew more about people than they knew about themselves, where they were going, what they were going to do." Gradually, his observations turned into an obsession. Rogers began fantasizing about how he could control other people's lives. "I imagined that I would make them do what I wanted," he continued. "They would depend on me." On September 14, 2018, Rogers spotted Mark and Ethan on trail number 7. A father and son, unaccompanied by other hikers. Perfect victims for his experiment. "I approached them dressed as a ranger," Rogers said. "I told them I knew a secret place with rare geysers." Mark believed him. Who would suspect a park employee of having evil intentions? The family followed Rogers along the trail. He led them to an isolated thermal field. There were no surveillance cameras or ranger patrols. "At first, I just wanted to scare them," Rogers claimed. "Show them who was in charge." He pulled out a knife and demanded that the Andersons kneel down. He wanted to humiliate them, to feel complete power over people. But the father tried to protect his son. Rogers' voice grew quieter. "He lunged at me." A struggle ensued. Mark was stronger. But Rogers had the knife. In the struggle, the blade pierced the man's stomach. "I didn't mean to kill him," the suspect repeated. "It was an accident." But Ethan saw everything that happened. The boy screamed for his father's help. Rogers realized that the witness had to be eliminated. "The boy knew my face," he explained in a cold tone. "I couldn't let him go." Rogers grabbed 12-year-old Ethan. The child fought desperately, scratching and biting. But the forces were unequal. The criminal lifted the boy and threw him into the nearest hot spring. The water temperature exceeded 90 degrees. Death was instantaneous. The wounded Mark was still breathing. He saw his son being killed. He tried to crawl toward the spring, but his strength was failing him. "I couldn't leave him alive," Rogers concluded. "I dragged him to the cliff and pushed him into the ravine." Detective Hardy struggled to contain his emotions. In 20 years of service, he had seen a lot. But the murder of a child always shook him to the core. "Where exactly did you dump the body?" he asked. "I'll show you," Rogers replied, "if it will help the family." On October 27th, a search party led by Rogers went to the ravine. The criminal pointed out the exact spot where he had dumped Mark Anderson's body. The remains were found in a crevice between rocks at a depth of 180 meters. A forensic examination confirmed the identity and cause of death: stab wounds and injuries from the fall. Mark's body was taken to the morgue. After 5 years of searching, the family finally had the opportunity to give their loved one a proper burial. Jennifer Anderson greeted the news with tears of relief, not tears of joy. The pain of loss had not gone away. But now she knew the truth. "Finally, my boy can rest in peace," she told reporters, "and so can his dad." On October 30th, the prosecution filed final charges against Kevin Rogers: first-degree murder with aggravating circumstances, murder of a child, concealment of a corpse. The defense attorney attempted to reach a plea bargain. He offered a guilty plea in exchange for life imprisonment without the death penalty. Prosecutor Michael Stewart rejected the deal. The public demanded the maximum punishment for the child killer. "This crime shook the entire country," Stewart said. "Justice must prevail." On January 15, 2024, the trial of Kevin Rogers began. Federal Court of Montana. Judge Robert McClin presided over the proceedings. The trial attracted national media attention. Journalists from across the country covered the court hearings every day. The prosecution was represented by the experienced Michael Stewart. The defense was led by attorney Patrick O'Malley, who specializes in serious crimes. Stewart methodically presented evidence of the defendant's guilt: DNA tests, witness testimony, physical evidence. Kevin Rogers cold-bloodedly murdered an innocent child, the prosecutor said in his opening statement. He took the life of a boy who just wanted to spend time with his father. The defense tried to portray Rogers as mentally ill. O'Malley insisted on a sanity hearing for the defendant. "My client suffers from serious mental disorders," the lawyer argued. He was not fully aware of his actions. On January 20th, psychiatrist Dr. Susan Gray was called to the stand. She had spent 3 months examining Rogers in a prison hospital. "The defendant has been diagnosed with antisocial tendencies," Gray testified, "but he was fully aware of the illegality of his actions." The expert opinion found Rogers to be sane at the time of the crime. The defense's attempt to reduce the case to mental illness failed. On January 25th, Jennifer Anderson testified as a witness. The mother of the deceased spoke about 5 years of agonizing search. "Every day, I woke up hoping to hear something about my son," she said, unable to hold back her tears. "Rogers didn't just steal Ethan from me. He stole 5 years of my life." The mother's testimony made a strong impression on the jury. Several people cried as they listened to her story. On January 30th, Ranger Sarah Wilson took the stand for the prosecution. She described how she found the remains in a hot spring. "I knew right away that it was a human bone," Wilson recalled. "For 5 years, I was tormented by the fact that I couldn't help them that night." On February 1st, the defense presented witnesses who described Rogers as a quiet and non-confrontational man. Former colleagues spoke of his professionalism. "Kevin always did his job well," testified technician Brian Cole. "Yes, he was reserved, but I never saw any aggression in him." These testimonies did not impress the jury. The evidence of guilt was too convincing. On February 5th, Prosecutor Stewart delivered his closing argument. He once again reminded the jury of all the circumstances of the case. "Kevin Rogers committed a heinous crime," Stewart said. "He killed a child to satisfy his sadistic fantasies." In his closing statement, defense attorney O'Malley asked the jury for leniency. He referred to the defendant's mental health issues. "My client is sick," the defense attorney argued. "He needs treatment, not the death penalty." On February 8th, the jury retired to deliberate. The deliberations lasted 4 hours. When the 12 men returned to the courtroom, the room was deathly silent. The foreman read the verdict. On the charge of first-degree murder, guilty. On the charge of child murder, guilty. On the charge of concealing a corpse, guilty. Rogers showed no emotion. He sat motionless, staring ahead. On February 12th, a sentencing hearing was held. The prosecution sought the death penalty. The defense asked for life imprisonment. Judge McLean reviewed the case file and the defendant's character. He took into account the opinions of the victims' families and public opinion. "The crime committed by the defendant is one of the most heinous in the history of our state," the judge said. "The murder of a child cannot go unpunished." The sentence was life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Rogers did not appeal. He accepted his punishment as inevitable. On February 15th, he was transferred to ADX Florence, a maximum security federal prison in Colorado. The prison houses the country's most dangerous criminals. Rogers will spend the rest of his life in a 2-by-3-meter solitary confinement cell. He will have no right to visits, correspondence, or early release. On May 5th, 2024, the funeral of Mark and Ethan Anderson took place. Father and son were buried side by side at Mount Olivet Cemetery in Denver. Hundreds of people attended the funeral. Relatives, friends, and colleagues of Mark. Ethan's classmates, rangers and detectives who had been searching for them for 5 years. "Today we say goodbye to wonderful people," said the priest. "Their deaths remind us of the fragility of life and the importance of justice." Jennifer Anderson gave the eulogy. Her voice trembled, but her words were firm. "Mark and Ethan loved nature," she said. "They passed away in one of the most beautiful places on earth. That gives me some comfort." After the funeral, Jennifer continued the work of the Find Ethan Foundation. Since its inception, the organization has helped find 23 missing children. "I can't bring my son back," she said of her motivation, "but I can help other families avoid our pain." The Yellowstone National Park Administration tightened security measures after the tragedy. All employees now undergo extensive psychological screening. Additional surveillance cameras have been installed in remote areas of the park. The number of evening patrols has been increased. Ranger Sarah Wilson planted 2 trees in the memorial garden, an oak and a maple, in memory of the father and son who loved nature and fell victim to it. The Whispering Spring has been closed to tourists. A memorial plaque was erected nearby. In memory of Mark and Ethan Anderson. Nature is beautiful, but it can be dangerous. In the summer of 2024, Jennifer returned to the scene of the tragedy with the rangers. She wanted to say goodbye to the place where her loved ones had spent their last hours. Standing at the spring where her son died, Jennifer did not cry. The pain had not gone away, but something new had emerged. Acceptance. Justice has been served, she told Sarah Wilson. Rogers will never hurt another child. The Anderson case was a turning point for safety in national parks. Congress passed a law requiring mandatory psychological testing for all employees. Kevin Rogers is serving his sentence at ADX Florence Prison. In 2024, he appealed his sentence, but the court rejected his appeal. The prisoner spends 23 hours a day in solitary confinement. He has 1 hour of exercise in a small open-air courtyard. No visitors, no television, no internet. Psychologists note signs of deep depression in Rogers, but he refuses treatment and psychological help. He got what he deserved, comments prosecutor Stewart on his condition. Justice is not always merciful. In 2025, the Find Ethan Foundation celebrated its 7th anniversary. During this time, the organization has helped 47 families of missing children. Jennifer regularly gives lectures on child safety. She tells her story to students at criminology departments. Evil can hide behind the most ordinary face, she warns her audience. We must be vigilant to protect our children. The story of Mark and Ethan Anderson reminds us that justice sometimes takes time, but it always comes. It took 5 years to solve this crime. Hundreds of people participated in the search for the truth. Modern technology helped find clues that seemed hopelessly lost. In the end, good triumphed over evil. The criminal received his just punishment. The family found peace. But the price of this victory was too high. 2 innocent lives, a broken family, years of agonizing searching. Yellowstone's natural beauty continues to mesmerize millions of tourists. Geysers erupt on schedule. Wild animals roam the forests. Hot springs attract travelers from all over the world. But now park visitors know that beauty can hide danger, and that danger doesn't always come from wild animals or natural forces. Sometimes the most dangerous predator is man. A memorial plaque at the Whispering Spring serves as a lasting reminder of this truth. Mark and Ethan Anderson are gone, but their memory lives on. Their story is a lesson for all of us. It teaches us to cherish every moment with our loved ones. It teaches us that justice will catch up with every criminal sooner or later, and that even in the darkest stories, there is always room for hope. Justice has prevailed. The family has found peace. The criminal has been punished. This will not bring back those who have died, but it gives hope that such tragedies can be prevented.